Light pollution news, July 2025. Identity. How should we be framing nighttime preservation issues? And what on earth is airglow? And what do you need to take photos of fireflies? This episode, I welcome back Mr. Jeff Calta of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival and Mr. Tom Reinert of Dark Sky International. And I also welcome Babak Tafreshi to the show. Settle in. You're about to get some helpful tips to help improve your nighttime photography. Let's go. Here we go. It's another Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, welcoming you, the listener, to a show that we do twice a month. We talk about all the goings-on around a surprisingly wide slate of topics that affects or is affected by the artificially bright night. Keep your ears peeled for anything that piques your interest. If you hear something you want to comment on or share, why not shoot over a message to me, bill@lightpollutionnews.com, or you can simply text us via the show note in today's link. Or you can simply text us via the text link in today's show notes. Also, be sure to follow us via whatever social media you use, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and more. Lastly, Light Pollution News is 100% listener supported. That means we take no outside funds to cover our extensive costs ranging from server space, domain space, staffing for maintaining social media, writing the shows, searching out all the articles, editing down the shows. If you like what we do, we'd appreciate at least a 5-star review. If you like what we do, we appreciate a 5-star review or share. And if you're so inclined, we also have supporter plans starting at $3 a month. From that, you'll be able to join the show as a guest, and you'll have access to all of the news that we pull each month. This month, that includes over 150 news articles. So if you think it's worth it, if you'd like to see us grow, if you think it's worth it, if you think what we do is worth it, you'd like to see us grow, we greatly appreciate your support at whatever level that may be. Before we jump in, as a reminder, you can find all of today's show links on the show notes of this episode. With me this episode is retired chemist turned Firefly enthusiast, Mr. Jeffrey Calta. And Jeffrey is the president of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival. It happens every June in a place just north of Clarion, PA. Jeffrey, welcome back to the show. I want to ask you something I didn't. So have you seen any positive actions by businesses or residents or local governments around where the Firefly Festival occurs in response to, say, more responsible lighting?
I guess the easy answer is not really. But Forest County, where the Firefly Festival is held, is very rural. I consider it a dark sky. I mean, it's a very dark sky. There's just not many homes there, a lot of camps, but not with a lot of lighting. So we really, it's one of the poorer counties in Pennsylvania in terms of income. There doesn't seem to be a big interest, but Ken Butler put together an economic impact that the festival has had. And it was interesting is that, over the 12 years, I guess it's been in operation, it looks like it has brought $3 to $4 million worth of business and money into the county in terms of restaurants, people looking for a place to stay if they're looking for fireflies. So bed and breakfast, hotels, motels, restaurants, other avenues of, business that are impacted because people are coming to Forest County to see the fireflies. So in terms of the dark sky issue, it pretty much is already a dark sky area. There's just not a lot of light because there's not a lot of people and not a lot of lights going on. But Ken and Peggy Butler, who live right there, they live in Forest County, they have been doing their best to educate people on the problems of light pollution. And one of the things PATH does every year, we started last year, we put out a poster that's called Lights Out for Lightning Bugs in June. Again, I think I mentioned it in the first half. June is the major mating month for fireflies in Pennsylvania. So we try to encourage people all over the state, but definitely in Forest County as well, to turn off unnecessary lights or install motion detector lights. because of the problem. And I think the fact more and more people are coming, we have seen an increase in the lottery applications for the festival. So we know there's people want to see it. So we know the word's getting out. But for the most part, I think most people in non-Firefly people in Forest County, if you say, well, we'd like you to turn your lights off. And they say, well, we don't have any lights to begin with. And it's true in a lot of places at Forest County.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear about the positive things you guys have been doing, trying to get the word out on that. So that's great news. Next up with me is a guest I was hoping to have on the first episode, but just like me, I guess today, trying to run to catch the bus, right? I was running a little behind. And I would like to welcome Babak Tafreshi to the show. So thank you, Babak, for joining me today. You started the World at Night program back in 2007, 2 years before the International Year of Astronomy. Through your talents and connections, you helped grow that into what it became. I want to stop here for a moment. The internet was completely different back then. It feels like a whole different world back then. In some ways, it's kind of nostalgic, right? To go back to early 2000s. Back then, I believe there were only a couple of social media services, and they were all kind of browser-based. You didn't have it on your phone. We didn't have modern smartphones like the iPhone had. I don't think it came out yet, or maybe it was just coming out at that point. And then podcasts like this were just starting. They're just kind of a very, very niche thing. I still recall listening to some of the OGs from back in the day. So simple stuff, web-based content management systems. I'm sure you had to deal with this back with the World at Night started. Very, very different, very changing. I remember Drupal was coming up. WordPress is already kind of established. I'm curious about this because it feels like a little bit of nostalgia. And I've wanted to ask this. So tell me a little bit about the idea to start World at Night. Did you ever think it would become as big as it did? Was there ever a point where you're like, oh, yeah, this will be, kind of like a benchmark for the way people think of nighttime?
Well, it was actually a teenagehood dream, an idea that came to me when I started astrophotography in the 90s. Around 92, 93, I started to do astrophotography through a telescope, but soon after I realized my main passion is to include earth and sky in one frame, to bring a message that night sky above us is part of environment, is also worthy to protect. And in order to include that message, you need something to resonate with the audience, and that's the foreground. That's an iconic heritage site or natural sites that you can communicate with general public who have lost the connection to the sky due to light pollution. So this was an idea that came to me when I was growing up in Iran, and diversity of cultural heritage, such as castles and ruins of ancient times and different religions, showed me that there is just one roof above all humanity, regardless of where we are located or what culture we have. We are under this borderless sky. Then throughout the years, I became more and more involved with international community of astronomers and astrophotographers with traveling, especially documenting solar eclipses. So I found other people with the same goal and the same perspective, and we became a growing group of astrophotographers doing this. So the idea became gradually a project. And then with the help of my colleague, Mike Simmons in Southern California, in Los Angeles area, who was the founder of Astronomers Without Borders and currently managing Astronomy for Equity and several other projects, the World at Night became the first project within that organization. And then we introduced it to the International Year of Astronomy. It became the first special project of Year of Astronomy. So got connected to UNESCO, and we managed to do exhibits, more than 100 exhibits in 30 countries during the Year of Astronomy. So I was still based in Iran at the time, and it was difficult due to sanctions and problems within Iranian system to do this as a growing project. So I moved to Germany in 2011, and the project had a very fast, rapid growth in Europe. And then I moved to the US in 2015, mainly to collaborate more with National Geographic, which I started back in 2010. So back to your question, no, I didn't think that it's going to be such a major impact in global astrophotography community at the time, but it was a long-standing idea. I had it from teenagehood together with a colleague of mine who is also a Tuan member, Oshin Zakarian. So I'm happy that In the early years, it had a major impact when there was no social media or very limited, as you mentioned, and people were more relying on website. We created the world's largest collection of such images in one place, so they can see all different celestial phenomena and places at nighttime, with over roughly about 10,000 images we made after a few years. Some with Tuan members, which is currently about 40 photographers in 25 countries, and some by guest contributors. And we did for 5-6 years an annual international photo contest with the goal to increase public awareness about light pollution.
The whole idea behind the world at night feels very much of that age when everyone was thinking of the internet as a way to better humanity. We had this kind of utopian idea of what we could do with the internet, right? And obviously things have panned out a little differently since that, but maybe that's where nostalgia comes from, is from that very vision that you and Mike had for good, to benefit the world that we live in. And
yeah, in fact, we didn't change even the website design for more than 15 years until 2022. So we were honored to have the oldest looking website on internet, maybe after spaceweather.com is still beating us on that.
You guys have switched from Windows XP, right? You're not on that anymore, right?
Yes.
Well, your current project, and I'm curious about this, Life at Night Atlas. And this is something I recall seeing Nat Geo. Natalie Hutchinson did a nice little write-up last summer on it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this? And is this kind of what you want your legacy to be?
Throughout the years, I realized, we are documenting the beauty of the night sky to increase the connection of humanity with this lost part of the nature, to show the wonders of the universe in a way. So this is astronomy communication. But over the years, I realized there is a missing gap in visuals of documenting impact of light pollution on wildlife. We have all the beauties of the universe and darker skies, but where is the visual that show the problem? That we are impacting fireflies, sea turtles, bats. Almost every single nocturnal species is either negatively or positively impacted. Or it has changed the natural rhythm in a way. We are impacting so many migratory birds. Where is a visual that a science communicator or a journalist can use to tell the story to people? So there are very few. And as a photographer, I noticed this gap and a responsibility to respond, especially within the National Geographic. You have this feeling that you need to make an impact with your photography. So that's why I gradually, since 2013-14, moved towards this part of documenting light pollution impact. But then in 2022, National Geographic accepted my application for a grant to do this project. So there are two parts of Nat Geo. One is National Geographic Partners, which includes the magazine, TV, books, and most of the publications we have. This is owned by Disney. And then the 25% of National Geographic is still the nonprofit, which was the origin of Nat Geo. It's called National Geographic Society. And that provides grants for research, for storytelling, for educators. And this is a project connected to the society. Life at Night Atlas is a long-term project. I see it more like the World at Night that is going to continue over the years and grow more team members. And in the first phase, I did some documentation on bats in Texas and some few other places, but mainly bats of Texas, because some of the world's largest colony of bats are located near San Antonio. Then sea turtles of southern Florida, in Oman, and a bit in Costa Rica, with the focus on impact of light pollution on sea turtles hatching and nesting, which is a story I'm pretty sure that you have talked about it multiple times on this podcast. And then I did a project in Great Smoky for fireflies, the world's largest colony of synchronists in the Western Hemisphere are mating in Great Smoky, North Carolina and Tennessee. And the story was how this place became a sanctuary to these fireflies and they're protected from light pollution, and how some other fireflies are disappearing partly due to light pollution. And in fact, a part of the project was in my backyard in Salem, Massachusetts, in the greater Boston area. The first year we arrived to this house, there was this really bright light back of our house, which is a large wooden area. And that was the first thing I did, to switch that light off, change it to motion sensor and warmer light, warmer LED, to the intensity that I need. I'm not going to illuminate the next 5 blocks,
not a
just 1 yard. Yeah, exactly. It's not a gas station. And then, of course, we didn't use any chemical pesticide. We left some of the leaves to be there in the backyard. And now we have growing firefly colony here. Every year we have the show. I no longer need to go to Tennessee to see it. We have a great show here in the backyard. Of course, not as diverse in the number of species as we have in the Great Smoky. And then the other part of the project was on bioluminescence. And there is no clear impact of light pollution on bioluminescence of planktons, as far as I know. But a lot of microorganisms in the ocean are impacted. So when planktons are, for example, fishing boats are using really bright LEDs to attract squid and other deep sea species to come to the surface. This makes things much easier, much more productive. If you look at the ocean at some of these places like the western coast of Thailand or in Vietnam, or even the southern coast of the U.S. Gulf of Mexico, and the coast of Brazil, for example, you see on the ocean that how bright are these lights coming from the boats towards the ocean and attracting squid. But with the squid, they also attract planktons up. And when you change planktons, the layer in the ocean, you change all the marine ecosystem in a way, because everything depends on that. So when planktons are coming to the surface in the wrong time, you are changing the entire ecosystem. And this is something I'm trying to document in that part of bioluminescence. For the regular part, I went to the beauty part. I went to Puerto Rico, the island of Vieques, which is home to the world's best known bio bay. And it's really spectacular when you paddle with a kayak, you see that light in the dark area. At the moment, this was the first phase. The second phase I'm hoping to do is on migratory birds and also the relation of human with the sky, with the darkest sky, and how light pollution is interfering. For example, some of the native indigenous people in the world that are still relying on that connection for their cultural practices.
Those are all the impacts. I think you summarized everything really well there. I love the work. Looking forward to seeing it. We'll get a little further down the road on that as the show goes on. But rounding out today's guests, I want to welcome back Mr. Tom Reinert, the past president of Dark Sky International. And Tom, before we spoke, you had sent something over to me. As of this recording, you would have already done the 2025 Green Bank Star Quest. You haven't done it yet in real life. You forwarded over some slides. And one of the things I got from your slides was that there's a real big push to be cognizant of language, framing, and facing the reality that having good lighting kind of requires all of us to step up and be engaged in our communities. Is that correct? Why don't you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. And I've been really focusing a lot on how you define the problem and how you articulate it, because it can make big differences. We use the term light pollution. Light pollution is something everyone in this program understands. It's measurable. But when you go out to the rest of the world and talk about light pollution, you often get sort of cold stares back. And the reason why, in my view, is if you talk to people about water pollution, they know, oh, I want clean water. I want water I can drink and swim in. If you talk to them about air pollution, I want air I can breathe. If you talk to them about light pollution, what do you want? You want clean light? Clean light is not a term, right? So we've been talking more about responsible lighting and sustainable lighting. So we can go out to folks and say, here's what we're for. We're not just against light pollution, because there's no suggestion being against light pollution, what the cause of it is and what the solution is. Light pollution is a problem of bad lighting infrastructure worldwide, poorly designed lighting. So the answer is well-designed lighting, smart lighting, not stupid lighting. So we've used the term responsible lighting mostly, and that's what we're going to communities and saying. We're in favor of responsible lighting. We don't want your community to be dark. You want to be able to see things so you can function at night. But safe lighting doesn't require 6,000 Kelvin unshaded fixtures that go out all over the place. And here's what responsible lighting looks like. So it's partly language, it's partly reframing the dialogue and the issue we're trying to address. But it's a major point that I personally, and I think the organization is trying to pursue right now.
Well, you also mentioned that Dark Sky International has been selected by 6degrees.org and Advertising Week to be the benefactors of top-tier advertising campaigns.
We've all played 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? You can line up any 2 actors through Kevin Bacon. Theoretically, you can probably line up any 2 people on the planet with 6 degrees of relationship. So Kevin Bacon really didn't like this game initially, but he's a good sport, and he turned around and he started a nonprofit called 6degrees.org. And what 6degrees.org does is it funds other nonprofits. And every year they take 5 or 6 organizations and they pay for advertising campaigns. They have a competition. So we had to apply for it. Sarah Martin, our new development director, said, let's go do this. And we were one of the 5 selected. And what that means is they're going to assign an advertising agency to us. And October, they have a thing called Advertising Week in New York. It's really where they promulgate all the campaigns for the end of the year. So we'll be part of Advertising Week in New York. They will pay for national advertising, beginning in October through various forums. So it'll be interesting to get some professional advertisers involved and see how they want to articulate the issue, what they think will vibrate with people sympathetically. And Babak, I hope you get you some photos in this, because you've been playing this for a long time. But we are hopeful this is going to be a major increase in awareness about light pollution and responsible lighting solutions.
Congratulations to Dark Sky International, and good luck. Good luck, definitely. I want to start off actually with an article we couldn't get to last show. This is pretty neat. Back in 2021, Nevada Senate Bill 52 gave the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation the task of implementing a dark skies certification program, which officially came into effect late last year. Last month, the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation and Travel Nevada released a digital Nevada Dark Skies Toolkit that offers homeowners, businesses, and governments advice on how to implement responsible lighting practices. As more motivation for following instructions laid out by the Department of Outdoor Recreation, Nevada organizations also could register as a Starry Skies certified place, including school, homeowners association, tribal nations, park conservation area, municipal, business associations, you have it. It's all part of the push by the state to capitalize on astrotourism. This is a major push on astrotourism. I don't think I've seen other states do this. So is Dark Sky going all in here? I assume Dark Sky has been heavily working with Nevada on this.
Well, we are very supportive of astrotourism. And I think actually the adjoining state, Utah, their state advertising department, tourism department has been pretty good as well. And, any certification program people want to come up with that generates interest and certifies people who are pursuing dark sky, great with us. Astrotourism, we actually polled our dark sky places last year and a half ago, find out what was going on with astrotourism. And most dark sky places had some form of astrotourism related to them. And from that, we developed some guidelines for astrotourism. And it's a lot of common sense stuff about how you should conduct astrotourism in a way that you don't negatively impact the environment, you positively impact the community. So astrotourism is a big drive, and we're very supportive of it at Dark Sky. Now, realistically, astrotourism has limitations. And the limitations are, if you really want to convince people to come for like a week someplace, you better provide something for them to do during the day as well as at night. So, and there aren't many places that meet that bill well. Short-term astrotourism, going for a night to see the fireflies, is a different animal than places that are really trying to have extended periods of going on safari or something, or doing tours of observatories. So there are many organizations out there working to do astrotourism, to get people involved. We think it's positive. We encourage it. But we hope you observe some guidelines to do it responsibly so you're not adversely affecting the fireflies or whatever creatures are there. You're regulating the numbers and you're having a positive impact on your community.
Yeah, I've said this to Scott Morgan, who is one of the chief honchos of the Cherry Springs area. And that, man, if you guys build a mountain biking area in there, we already bring the kayaks for daytime, and if you put a mountain biking in there, I'd be really happy because then I could do everything and probably never sleep and probably actually be in really bad shape when I come home. But, I'd be there for the whole week, without a doubt. Want to switch gears real fast. I do have some articles I want to touch base on. And Tom, since you're here, you get to field them. Streetlights is an interesting thing. And here in the U.S., we have experiments running the gamut. You have Atlanta, Georgia, which is close to wrapping up its 30,000 LED fixture conversion. It's the Light Up the Night campaign, which city leaders anticipate will get rid of 20% of the crime. Wasn't able to identify the color of lights. I don't think that's part of it. I think it's just switching everything over into bright LED lights. They're probably 4,000 Kelvin. I think that's what's going on from the pictures I see, but I can't speak to that. I really don't know the specifications are. They don't list the specifications. They just seem to be replacing their fixtures with LED fixtures. And that includes Acorn or you name it, any kind of style. Swing over to Flint, Michigan. City leaders are jumping on a weaponization bandwagon. Here in Philadelphia, we are part of that trend. We just had a recent study come out on how weaponized lighting can reduce crime. Flint, Michigan is targeting the highest crime areas with a flood of new streetlights. So that's something there. If you haven't seen this at home, I can tell you from my experience, weaponized lighting in many parts of the city, it's not pretty. And it's not always the city that's doing it. Sometimes it's community, sometimes it's strip malls, sometimes it's apartment complexes. What they do is they use lighting that is so intense, so harsh, and it's so white. It really does leave a sunspot in your eye if you look directly at it. And most of the fixtures are not aimed down, they're aimed outward, so it's hard not to catch it every now and then. But some of these areas are super, super bright. It's hard to compare the brightness level of some of these spots. And then finally, here in my home state, in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh has officially kicked off its street lighting retrofit. This one's going to look a lot different from the other two, from Atlanta or from Flint, whereby, thanks to the hard work of the team over there, Diane Turnchek, Stephen Quick, and everyone, the lighting will be using 2200 Kelvin color temperature lights. The Steel City has a website where you can actually track the conversion progress. Earlier in the year, we had Canberra, Australia, down the Australian capital, implementing dimming controls in their streetlights. So there's a lot of experiments going on. Tom, where do you see this landing?
First of all, the belief that lighting up the city more is going to reduce crime doesn't work. Plainly doesn't work. Chicago went this path many years ago, decided we're going to light up every alley, every street, and it's going to reduce our crime rate. It didn't. Crime rate continued to go up. Why? Because criminals like light. They can see what they're doing. So, but there is this very visceral emotional attachment that if I have more light, I'm going to be safer. And that simply does not bear out. Good lighting, good focus lighting, motion detectors, well-designed lighting can be impediments to crime if you do it right. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people putting up higher LEDs and saying, now I'm safe. Doesn't work, hurts the environment. And the problem is there's no discussion of what the cost of light is. And I've talked to like women's groups. They say, well, we want to light up the night. We feel safer. And I'll say, how do you feel about increased breast cancer risk? You're not assessing the risk along with the benefit. And that's what needs to be done. And to have an intelligent discussion on lighting, you really have to assess what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it. Street lights are a major problem. I mean, I hear Atlanta, they're just very slow in transitioning to LEDs. The experience of many communities, they had a budget for lighting and they said, oh, LEDs are cheaper. We'll just increase the lighting level rather than say, hey, LEDs are cheaper. We can save some money by having comparable lighting with well-designed LEDs. LEDs are not inherently evil, but if they're poorly used, they create a lot of light pollution. They're adjustable. The city of Tucson has turned its LEDs down to like 30% of their max, and no one's noticed because your vision at night is relative to the intensity of the other lights. So we need a major infrastructure project in North America and in Europe addressing streetlights. What are the proper use of streetlights? How many do you need? What type of temperature should they be? What type of intensity? But this view that we're just going to bring in a lot more streetlights and we're going to be safer is a fool's errand, quite frankly. It just won't work.
Tom, I had Art Hushin on earlier, and we were talking about the Philadelphia study. It's interesting that the streetlight team will take the credit, but the nonprofits that work in the trenches get no credit for the hard work that they do to help pacify the community, to help bring opportunity to community.
Well, that's always the case when you're dealing with local government. If you deal with them smartly, you have to figure out how you're going to get them to get some credit for what you're doing, and you're going to step back. So that's the nature of being a nonprofit.
Oh, spoken clearly, right?
Yeah, I would like to add something about the impact. Just following up what Tom mentioned. We use light for a variety of reasons. It's safety, security, of course, but it's also for control. As you mentioned, we use light sometimes to control minorities, and that is visible when you look at the earth at night in some areas. We use light for identity and commercial purposes. Some areas, it's very touchy discussion to talk about dimming lights. That was the case for Belgium highways. For many years, they didn't dim the lights. It was part of the identity of the country. They finally did. And that's the same, for example, in downtown Las Vegas. The light of Luxor Casino is part of the identity. But when you open the discussion of the impact it's creating on migratory birds, on animals, on human beings, then that's the angle is going to change that perspective. And the city of Tucson or Flagstaff are great examples where people are celebrating this new identity that we are not visible at night. Not everybody wants to be visible vividly from a space. And I just finished a project for National Geographic called Above and Below, and it's photography coordinated with an astronaut. And I was looking at hundreds or thousands of images taken during the last few months from space by astronaut Don Pettit. And looking at that area in Arizona, you are really striking, looking at comparing Phoenix with Flagstaff. The size of the city is, of course, different, but just look at the difference in light. It's really striking because Flagstaff is almost invisible from a space in a wide-angle view. And this is because the light is used responsibly and it is available and widely appreciated by the locals. The dim light is not notable to them, but they also embrace that new identity that we are protecting the darkest skies. We are in a more eco-friendly and environment, and we are also protecting human health. This is also going back to the cultures, indigenous cultures that need this connection to the sky. And now this new identity through Darkest Sky International as a designation for communities which embrace darkest sky. And I think it's a very successful path because you're not only bringing astrotourism, a sustainable revenue for the community, you're also bringing this new identity.
Yeah, the identity piece. That's a really interesting take on it. Thank you, Babak. You're talking about health-related effects, right, Tom? For people who are, I think that because the safety argument is probably the toughest and also the one that it's not a real argument. It's more of you're fighting a feeling, right? So we do have one health-related piece in here, and it comes from the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology. Researchers collected about 500,000 hospitalization cases over a span of 8 years between 2012 through 2020 and looked at how generalized environmental light pollution correlated with heart attacks. That's light pollution taken from the analysis of satellites and how it correlated with heart attacks, irregular heartbeats, and stroke. They found a 7% higher chance of stroke, a 15% higher chance of irregular heartbeat in such environments. However, other factors were also considered: air pollution, weather, and safety. Tom, what do you recommend when you're talking about safety? I mean, one of the things that I think is obviously is very, very clear is that I am a white guy trying to tell this community that we should not have bright lights because that doesn't make us feel safer. And that is not what the community wants.
You know, I mentioned Ken Walczak at the Adler Planetarium, the earlier program. And the Adler Planetarium did a program with high school students. And they started talking about light pollution. The kids sort of shrugged. You know, they just didn't get it. And then they gave them a bunch of cheap digital cameras. And they said, go out and take photos. And they came back with photos of windows covered with black tape because there was a school light across the street. And they did a display. They did a show, a gallery show of what the kids found. And it really embarrassed the community because these kids were principally lower economic, principally Hispanic community. And they were able to show, you know, they were living under some really high levels of intrusive light, and people were responding to it negatively, whether it was for a health consequence or aesthetic. They didn't like it. And it does have a surveillance element to it. It has a control element to it. And when you shine the light on that through photography, they got some response in the community, and the schools have started turning down some of the lights.
See what you did there, Tom. Very nice. Moving over to a much more fun topic, let's talk photography. A month ago, a man named Aaron Watson captured something that most people probably wouldn't even know exists, and that's airglow. His 30-minute time-lapse shows rippling through the darkness a field of green, and that's with the Milky Way cutting right through the center. Apparently, the show was visible to the naked eye, which is usually the case for this type of airglow, called night glow. It occurs at night as the sun deposits oxygen molecules, and then they're recombined and released in a green glow. Babak, certainly your skilled photographer as yourself has seen this many times. It's my understanding that this type of natural sky called chemiluminescence occurs in skies far removed from light pollution. And that's not to be confused with, say, a green aurora, right? Have you seen this? Have you ever captured anything like this?
Well, the funny story started when I was a teenager in maybe 94, 95. I was really frustrated with the laboratory which was developing the films because every single long exposure I was doing had this greenish background. And I thought maybe there's something wrong with my film. The laboratory person told me you were using Fuji. It's more sensitive to green. And we were really confused. What is going on? And then I read in a Sky and Telescope magazine, there was an article about airglow in the 90s. And it was really educational to me. I realized, there's nothing wrong with the laboratory. Then when I shifted to digital, of course, it was much easier to capture the patterns. With film and long exposure, it's just a glow in the backdrop. But with digital, you can capture something called the atmospheric gravity waves. And this is visible within the pattern of airglow, and it's very productive to science. Studying it is very new. We were not aware of that just 20 years ago, and throughout these years, wide-angle images of the sky revealing airglow is contributing to cutting-edge science in this field. And some of our colleagues, in fact, in the Board at Night member were involved with that, with those papers. I have seen it, of course, almost every single night. I have done photography in the past 30 years or so, but it's usually completely colorless to the eyes. I've never seen with color, and I've never seen it with very clear patterns, except for a couple of occasions where one was in the Grand Teton National Park. And at the beginning of the night, I was disappointed that there's so much airglow, but then it became one of my most iconic images because the airglow was so vivid in color to the camera. I just also mentioned that it's not only green. At the beginning and end of the night, it's yellow, orange, and throughout the midnight, it's more green. So there are two main components of colors. And these are happening within range of 60 to 80 miles, almost at the edge of the main part of the atmosphere, 90 kilometers on average. Airglow could be a problem to astronomers. They usually filter it out in research. observation, but sometimes it's so intense that it's affecting observation as well. It's fun for an astrophotographer to capture it, but after a few times it becomes a problem because you see it so often. It's also related to solar activity. As you mentioned, it's created by solar radiation in daytime, and then when the molecules reconnect, the atoms reconnect, at night, it still continues to glow and becomes visible to us. To an astronaut, it's always visible as a layer above the Earth without color. But when they take a picture from a space station, this green layer, sometimes orangish, is always visible. And sometimes it has a higher level too. One more thing is, you can also identify it from aurora. Aurora is fast moving. It's usually vertical in mid latitudes. You see like pillars of spikes above the horizon, while airglow is parallel to the horizon. It's moving much slower. So there are some differences, major differences that you can identify in your images. If you capture it from Hawaii, you're pretty sure this is not aurora.
Yeah, in this case, it looked kind of like waves, like actual rippling waves in the water.
Yes. These are the same thing, atmospheric gravity waves. And these are because of the density changes in our atmosphere creating these waves.
Wow. That is a great description on that. Now we all know a little more than we did in the beginning. That's great. Thank you, Babak. We got this other piece, noctilucent clouds. Sit up high in the atmosphere, around 50 miles above our surface in the mesosphere. So what happens is the endless sun in extreme northern latitudes stretch out past twilight, illuminating frozen dust in a patchwork pattern. This again comes from space.com, since we had a two for this month. But you kind of need to be up higher, like some Montana, Saskatchewan for our friends from the Actual Astronomy podcast. Babak, I'm going to toss this your way again. I've never seen this, and I'm sure you photographed this at some point in your career. Would you have any tips for the listener at home?
I photographed it a few times, not as many times as airglow. We have two Tuan members who are really specialized in this. One is PM Hedden in Sweden. The other one is Alan Dyer in Canada, Alberta. They photograph it very frequently in very stunning shapes. One thing is happening mostly during summertime in every hemisphere. So the best time, for example, is in Northern Hemisphere is between June to September, with the peak around July, August. And it's happening in the high altitudes, high latitudes. It's difficult to see because then in July you don't have the darkness. But if you wait until midnight in the deep twilight of the Arctic night, you can see them. They're still glowing. So in lower latitude, let's say 50 to 55, that's the peak. That's the best place to capture it. But occasionally they can reach lower latitudes, as low as the record, I believe, was 30 degrees. So that's the lowest we have seen or documented. So it has been photographed above Eiffel Tower in Paris, for example, or London. So these are between 40 to 55. And I would say 50 to 55 is the best latitude to capture that. You have to wait until the sun reaches roughly about -6, -7 degrees. This is the peak time. You start to see maybe one or two stars, the brightest planets in the sky. That's the time that NLCs are appearing in the sky. And then they last, depending on your latitude and how soon that orbit, that layer in the sky will disappear. They are also on the edge of a space, somewhere between 50 to 80 kilometers in the high altitude areas of our atmosphere.
Very cool. Very cool. I would love to see one. Seems like a pretty phenomenal night.
Yeah, there are different explanations about them, but the leading theory is related to micrometeorites that are raining down to the Earth atmosphere constantly. We have these micrometeorites coming down, and they are one of the main reasons for NLCs. But the other phenomena that can create noctilucent clouds similar to that is rockets going from the surface to the sky. Those are also creating similar phenomena. And as we are sending more and more rockets to space, we are changing the natural rhythm of NLCs.
Right. Yeah, I heard about that. That's an excellent point. In case you at home hear any background noise, as I mentioned in the first episode, I had to kind of be on a different site today, given that we have major storms come through and Philadelphia, and I'm actually recording out of the studio in a neighbor's house. And they have a band downstairs that's warming up. So, continuing on, the 2025 Milky Way Photographer of the Year awards came out, and these are amazing photos. And, your friend, Babak, Don Pettit, took an absolutely incredible photo from space, capturing Earth glow at night, and with an arcing Milky Way fading into the sunrise. Blows my mind, that photo. There's a myriad of composition-related images, and there's also this one that I was lucky enough to witness in person last year when I was out in Big Bend around the eclipse, the double Milky Way, being able to see the closing out of the winter Milky Way and the rising of the summer Milky Way. And that was spectacular. There's a lot of people in the nighttime space photography now. And, I know you're starting to see even more people start venture out and look for nocturnal insects and fungi and birds. And what do you think? What do you think the future holds for photography?
Well, I was mostly alone when I was doing night photography in previous years, maybe with a colleague. And, the place you go to a national park, all people are living when you're arriving for your work. And you're alone with the nature, connected to the nocturnal species and the sounds and to the universe and the earth at the same time. But this has changed. In the recent years, the places I'm going, there's always somebody there. And there's a growing number of people coming to these locations, not only for astrotourism, but also just to simply get connected to this forgotten part of our nature. And it happened to me just recently, a few nights ago. I was on a family trip. I was in South Dakota. And somewhere near Devil's Mount Rushmore, I was doing photography at night. And there was another photographer who came out of nowhere in 2 a.m. And it was funny to me because, this was never the case 20 years ago. But thanks to so much we're doing to protect the sky and the fast growing technology of digital cameras, it is available to so many other people, even with the smartphone. Nowadays, you can photograph the Milky Way, even with a handheld capture with your smartphone. It's incredible. The first image of the Milky Way that I was happy with took me 2 to 3 years to capture on film. And now somebody with a smartphone, the first night out, when you have access to darker sky, you get a clear shot of the Milky Way with your iPhone or other phones, with a 30-second exposure or handheld up to 10 seconds, because the phones are also stabilizing the shots even when you're handholding it. But with a smartphone and a tripod, it is definitely an easy target now. So what I'm seeing is an incredible growth of number of people who are doing astrophotography and enjoying capturing this from the technical perspective. We need to add the element of awareness. If you're enjoying this, do something to protect it as well. If you just share the message within your community, if you're going to a weekly event, going to a church, a sport event, you're going on a seminar with your professionals, just share this message that we are losing this part of nature and there are solutions available, like responsible lighting, change of our approach to darkness, that, we are not nocturnal species, we are afraid of dark. But there's also a way to get connected, to get acquainted with the night in a more peaceful way, to understand there is beauty left in the darkness. There is importance of keeping the natural darkness for thousands of species and for human health. So just sharing this, if you're passionate about astrophotography, share this message is going to be helpful. And then you can also get more active, become a member of Dark Sky International, become an advocate, even talk to, the decision makers. These are the next chapters in your passion to astrophotography. Photography has been always in parallel with impact. Photojournalists who are going to war, they have this message not only to be a successful photographer, but to make a change. And an astrophotographer can make that change as well by documenting both the beauty and the problem, the beauty of the sky, the problem of light pollution.
Hey, Babak, so we have Jeff here, who's a Firefly guy. What would your tips be for trying to photograph fireflies, say synchronized fireflies, and some of the ones that Jeff has out there at the Firefly Festival that he's president of?
Sure, it's very similar to night photography, with the stars. Now your attention, of course, is at the foreground. There are places where you can combine the two. For example, in the Great Smoky, there are not many options because the firefly activity is in a dense canopy. But in Pennsylvania, probably there are open areas and you can capture stars and the Milky Way while fireflies. I think it's going to multiply the beauty of the scene. So that's one approach to do long exposure, high ISO, like 1600 or similar. But very important tool here is a fast lens. So lenses come with a variety of options on a camera. So it could be a zoom like 24 to 200. These are not the lens to use at night. We need prime lenses, fixed focal or very, very limited range, like 15 to 35, 16 to 35. And the aperture, the widest f-stop or aperture on the lens needs to be 2.8 or better. That means lower, like f2, 1.4. These are called fast lenses because they can collect light in the short amount of time. And that's the case for fireflies because the glow is usually a short amount of time and it's not that bright. So you need a fast lens, a camera on a tripod, and it's possible to capture them on a phone as well, but it's much better on a proper camera. You don't need a fancy camera, just a camera and a fast lens and a stable tripod and long exposure. Some people do single exposure photography of fireflies, and some stack them together. It becomes really busy and in a way stunning, but not natural looking. So it depends on your taste. Are you going to stack all the images of a time lapse to create a striking view of fireflies, or just a single exposure that mimics how you experience it as a person there?
At our Firefly Festival every year since I've been there, which is 10 years now, we always have people coming to take pictures, and I am not a photographer. I don't know the details, but I know that the stacking of pictures seem to be important. But I think what Babak said is that it loses some of the natural magic that you have to be there to see it. And taking a picture and stacking the picture, you see a lot of lights, but it's not quite natural. From the people that have been there, and I ask questions, smartphones are really not the way to capture fireflies, or most people are disappointed when they try to do that. People that come with sophisticated equipment do better. But if you notice, and I'll call it an explosion on the internet, you'll see, there's some websites that I routinely see through Facebook or pictures, and firefly photography has exploded. Unfortunately, boy, I'll probably make some enemies here, but they all look the same. And if you stack the photographs, it gives you something that's happened over time, but you can't really capture the magic of a synchronous firefly display that way. All you see is the accumulated pictures of these things. But I know that everyone is interested in doing that, in capturing firefly and pictures, and I'm asked often, and I say, whoa, I'm not really the one to ask, but I do know some things. And what Babak said is it's growing. The number of pictures that you see people submitting of firefly pictures are just exploding on the internet. They all tend to look the same, which takes away a little bit of the magic. Now, there is one photographer, and Babak, maybe Radim Schreiber. He is probably the foremost firefly photographer, and he gets a lot of pictures that are not just, the stacked pictures. But I know that there's more and more increased interest in taking pictures, and we have a lot of people that show up at the Firefly Festival or near around that time that, come to take pictures, but they don't do the justice of the actual event being there. So again, I'll probably make some enemies here, but firefly photography I encourage everyone to do it if that's what they like to do. But I'm waiting for that next revolution in firefly photography where they can capture what I'm really seeing with my eyes that the camera just doesn't seem to be able to do.
Yeah, that's going to be real-time video, I would say, especially with synchronous, because the flashes are short and then there's this synchronous delay between 7-8 seconds. So I did that for the project with video. There's no way to do it in still photography. So in order to deliver that, you have to use a very sensitive camera, such as Sony A7S, or similar, and then really fast lenses like 1.4 lenses and high ISO cameras. So there, I would say even beginner photographers do have access to many of these equipments nowadays, so it's possible to capture that on video. And I totally agree with you that stacking too much in astrophotography in general is going to create some really artificial looking images. And with fireflies or any other wildlife, if you stack, you are on the border of documentary, even passing. Let's say you are in a safari in Kenya, somewhere like Masai Mara, and there's this one cheetah sitting on a hilltop, and you do a time lapse, and that cheetah is going to move to different places, and then you stack them, you have 200 cheetah in one shot. So it's the same thing with the firefly. If you have a few firefly, just to stack them, you will have millions of them in the image, and you will represent something which is not natural. Right. So this is the border of documentary photography, and it's the same with Milky Way photography. We have to be careful what we are presenting as a documentary of nature.
I'm glad people are doing it, because that means they're getting out. They're getting out and watching the fireflies. And, it's like I said, it may not be works of art, but the more pictures are taken, the more people show up to take pictures. Definitely. Wherever it may be of fireflies. To me, that's a great thing from our perspective, because it's shining light, as they say, on the fireflies. And I think that can only be good.
Certainly. And I would also suggest that, if you are a photographer thinking about your hobby seriously, photography is more like a visual storytelling, and it's a puzzle that's different pieces. So one piece of this photography could be firefly and stacking. Where are the other pieces? Think about that as a story. You will create something much more attractive and impactful. The other piece could be light pollution in the far distance. A family looking at fireflies, stars above. If you include all these images in one story, then it becomes much more impactful than only one striking image of a stack of fireflies.
I'm going to have to get a sound effect there for you, Jeff. Jeff, you and Tom shining a light. Every time anyone says that on the show, I'm going to have to hit that button. Babak, when I do firefly shots, what I like to do is actually use a zoom lens, get in there, because what I want is that one guy who's doing like the little swirly thing, and I want him being able to trace around the image, right? Is there a good way to do those?
Well, it depends on the species. For example, with the synchronous fireflies, the flash is short. There's not a long trail except for females, and that also depends on species we have. Give you a good example. There's one species I'm really interested to document, and I did it in the Great Smokies. It's called blue ghosts, and they're dim, and they are almost constant, like 10-15 seconds of glow as they move. So this is the way to go. With a telephoto, you can, or somewhere in the mid-range, like 35 to 50 millimeter, you can capture this firefly moving across the field during the entire single exposure. But with synchronous fireflies, exposure doesn't matter that much, because it's a sub-second phenomena, most of the time, maybe up to 1 second, not more. So if you do 30 seconds, you're creating more fireflies, but not that a specific one, because that's a sub-second phenomena. So I would say it depends on where you are to photograph that and what species you're documenting. They're so diverse. It was a very interesting observation to me. I went to Great Smoky looking for blue ghosts, and they did look slightly bluish, but in the camera, they were totally green. And that surprising fact is the peak of our eye sensitivity at very low light, it's shifting to blue light. And that is the reason we have problem with blue LEDs, even more than usual, a dark environment. because this is the peak intensity of human eye at dark. In daytime, it's different. It's between yellow and green, but at dark, it shifts to blue. And that's why we have blue ghost species, which is actually green.
Oh, wow. Did not know that. That's really interesting. Yeah. All right. Wow. Thank you for laying some knowledge there, Babak. Before we close out, obviously you guys have heard about the blackout in Spain back on April 28th, right? So it's fairly interesting. Babak, you mentioned earlier about Arizona and having dark spots, right? So there were 3 NASA satellites that took shots of Spain as they experienced blackouts. And researchers compiled the data of the 3 satellites, the Sumoy MPP, the NOAA 20 and NOAA 21 satellites, and created a motion GIF of the land-based effects. And you could see kind of the waviness of the light moving on the Earth. And it's all the artificial light going on and off. And how did the mild-mannered people of Spain actually experience this? Well, they had a good time. You know, they socialized. Some were playing chess, there's sing-alongs. Kema Marmol utilized the opportunity to take some Milky Way photos of his hometown, Montoya. And in Montoya, you know, you obviously always have lights on, but now he has these haunting Milky Way shots flowing over notable spots within the town, all because the lights went out for a little bit. You can't buy that, can you? Well, I want to give my guests a chance to plug themselves before we roll out of here. I have one more article after that, but hey, Jeff, where can people learn more about the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival?
Again, our website is one word, fireflyevents.org. And that would be a good place to start. That is our website. It has lots of links, lots of information concerning fireflies. Certainly a lot of the PAF activities are included in that, but that's what I would do, fireflyevents.org.
Excellent. And Tom, how can people find out about you, work you're doing?
The best source is the Dark Sky International website, which is darksky.org. But we have many local organizations. So put Dark Sky in your state, Maryland or Maine. Do that on Facebook, do it on Google, whatever browser you have. And you will find that there are a lot of local organizations or organizations in your community that are interested. There are also Lights Out organization. There are birder groups. So look for research light pollution in your community, and you'll find many more resources than you thought were there initially.
And Babak, where can folks learn more about what you do, your Life at Night projects? Where can folks learn more about that? And also, I want to mention, if you go out and purchase the World at Night book from Babak's website, for a few extra bucks, he'll autograph it with a personal message. It doesn't get better than that, folks. Babak, where would you like people to go?
Well, the portal is my own website, babaktafreshi.com, but also the Word at Night project has its own website, TWA Night, twanight.org. Nightatlas.org is going to be Life at Night project website. It's not publicly launched yet because the project is still in the first phase, but it will be in the next few months. So it's nightatlas.org. But more of my latest imagery and projects is on social media, specifically on National Geographic or my own Instagram page. So Nat Geo Instagram or Babak Tafreshi on Instagram.
And Babak, did I get this right? Did you actually get to hang out with Jack Johnson and do like part of visuals?
Yeah,
for
unfortunately,
a show?
we didn't meet each other in person. I was invited to a couple of concerts, but I was traveling at the time. I missed that. But I did provide him imagery to his team for the background of the concert for the Constellation tour that he had for over a year. I think it's still running. So I provide all the visuals for the backdrop, including fireflies, aurora, Milky Way, things like that. He has a deep connection to nature and appreciates dark skies a lot.
Oh man, that must have been so fun. It's a great niche you made for yourself. It has to be one of the most fulfilling things that a person could do in their life. I love projects that combine art and astronomy. I have a project called Celestial Orchestra where I'm working with Prague Metropolitan Orchestra and composer in Prague, and we sync images from both Life at Night and the Word at Night with original music pieces. There we go. Where do you find more about that? Where does that come?
That's more on my YouTube channel.
All right.
Which is, again, just my name. Yeah.
So go out to Babak's YouTube channel to see that. So finally tonight, how about this? A Brazilian port has decided to ditch the super bright LED lights. The lights apparently disrupted local endangered species, including maned wolves, anteaters, and more. Faro Port instead opted for an array of high-quality, low-light cameras to provide government-mandated 24/7 monitoring. Apparently, the video quality is crystal clear in darkness, and other environmental-friendly activities that FAIR has undertaken include planting upwards of 66,000 trees and also working to actively protect sea turtle hatchlings. Maybe Fairport, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing because I cannot roll the R, can set the stage for future companies. How about that, guys? That's a little bit of positive news to end on. I want to thank my guests for joining me. It's always fun to have a great slate of guests on the show. Thank you guys for, again, joining me and for sitting there and for being such great participants. I want to thank Babak Tafreshi, Tom Reinert, and Jeff Calta. And I also want to thank you, the listener at home today, for joining us. As a reminder, if you heard anything that makes you want to shoot over a comment or email, feel free to message me, bill@lightpollutionnews.com, or via our social media outlets on our website at lightpollutionnews.com. Light Pollution News is listener supported, which means that we take no outside advertising, solely rely on you, the listener, to help cover our expenses. If you like what we do, why not consider helping us by becoming a supporter? Today's show was recorded on June 22nd, 2025. I'm your host, Bill McGeady, and thanking you once more today. Remember to only shine the light where it's needed.